I want to dissect this one email that came from Dr. Auchincloss back to Dr. Fauci. Dr. Auchincloss, again, just to refresh, is Dr. Fauci's top deputy. So this is the email on Saturday, February 1st at 11:47 in the morning. It's in response to the one that Dr. Fauci sent in the middle of the night saying, hey, we got important things. I got to talk to you. Keep your phone on. You're going to have tasks to do, et cetera. So he gets back to him. The email says, the paper you sent me says the experiments were performed. Again, the paper is about gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab before the gain-of-function pause, but have since been reviewed and approved by NIH. Not sure what that means, since Emily is sure that no coronavirus work has gone through the P3 framework. She will determine if we have any to ties this work abroad. Dr. Giroir, are you part of when you were in the government, were you part of the P3 framework?
I was not.
How it does the P3 framework, my understanding it's an oversight board that is there to decide if you are, in fact, going to fund any gain-of-function research. Is that right?
That's what the intent is, but how it works, how research gets taken into that, it's unbelievable to me that coronavirus work would not get even into the process. If you look at the abstract from the latest grant that was done to EcoHealth, it talks about using protein sequence data, infectious clone technology, in vitro and in vivo infection experiments. This is all gain of function. How this could not get into the P3 process is unbelievable. And once it does, how does it work?
So
who's on it? How do you judge?
Let's just back up for a second. I should have done this earlier. There was a pause in any gain of function research. And my understanding was the pause was in 2014. And so for a few years, we didn't fund any of it, right? I don't know why I think there's a fundamental question if we should be funding it at all, but we were funding it, paused 2014, was restarted a few years later, but under the premise that if we're going to restart it, we're going to set up this P3 framework, this oversight body, this oversight function that people will have to look at this closely, or a second look or whatever, some oversight look before it gets funded. Who determines now in the P3 framework during this time, so when it was restarted, who determines what goes in front of the P3 framework or the P3 board? Who makes that determination?
I am sorry, I don't know that, and I don't think anybody knows that about out of the hundreds or thousands of grants, who picks which ones go and not. And if there were truly no coronavirus work that got there, you have an intake problem. That means dozens, hundreds of.
Well, someone's got to be responsible. Who heads NIH?
Well, ultimately the buck stops with Dr. Collins, who's the NIH director.
And Dr. Fauci, he makes decisions on this?
Dr. Fauci on NIAID. They are the directors. Ultimately, they are the responsible individuals.
So in the end, the people responsible for this, who are supposed to decide if a grant proposal is going to go in front of the P3 framework board process or not, is ultimately Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci. Is that right?
They run the institutes, they run the NIH, the buck stops there.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay. I think, Dr. Quay, you were getting ready to say something?
Well, yes, the moratorium started in 2014. It was taken away in May 2017. And as far as I know, there's never been a grant that's gone before this structure, the P3, despite the fact that it was set up. So it was set up to look for gain-of-function research, and my understanding is that there's been no grant that's been sent.
Well, my understanding is the guy who heads the chair of this board, this P3 framework board, is Dr. Hassel, and he's even said in a public forum, he volunteered this information that he's the chair, and he said it's been very limited, the work that they've done. Very few proposals come in front of them. But I think maybe the big takeaway for us today is the people responsible for making these decisions, Dr. Collins, Dr. Fauci, we invited them, they wouldn't come. And then the guy who chairs the board, Dr. Hassel, we invited him, and he wouldn't come. I think there's something there. Do you think? Well, let me do this question first, Dr. Muller. You raised something. Well, let me go back, Dr. Giroir. Why don't you think they're here? Why wouldn't they come? Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins and Mr. Hassel.
I don't know. I know Tony and I know Francis pretty well. I can't imagine a reason, because this is a worldwide pandemic in which millions of people have died. It may have been a result of a lab leak. There will be other, and we think highly likely it is, there will be other pandemics in the future. And if there's something we need, not just Congress, and I know you need it, but the American people in the world needs it, is truth and transparency and openness and trust. And when public officials who are supposed to have our trust don't show up to members of Congress, I think that's a problem.
He showed up everywhere for a year and a half. I mean, you couldn't go a day. You couldn't go a day and not see Dr. Fauci somewhere. He was everywhere. I mean, he's like man of the millennial or whatever time declared him. I mean, he was everywhere. And now when we have emails that he's sending out at 12 and 2 in the morning, and we have this gain of function that didn't go through the process it's supposed to go through, and we have all this evidence, suddenly you can't find him.
Well, all those redacted emails, they're redacted to you and to me, but they're not redacted to the people who are on it. So he could read it unredacted and refresh his memory and inform Congress. And look,
could.
When I was in the Trump administration, I got pinged by many antagonistic members on the House or the Senate side. 100% of time, I answered questions. I came to everything because I felt it was my duty as a public servant.
We appreciate that.
To try to be open to everyone, and you know that.
Yeah, this is not the first time you've testified.
So
You've testified many times. We appreciate
my
that.
former colleagues to be open and transparent and provide that type of honesty, transparency, and trust to the American people.
I want to go if the chairman will indulge, I want to do one more to Mr. Giroir, then I do want to come to you, Dr. Mueller. Dr. Giroir, Admiral, in your testimony, written testimony in Perspective 4, you said this: investigation of the origins of COVID-19 and the regulation of gain-of-function research cannot be left to scientists alone, many of whom have serious conflicts of interest. I think that is obvious. I mean, that's in the 4 emails I showed that took place in a 13-hour time span. I think that is clear just from those 4 emails, the conflicts of interest. But I wanted to give you a little chance to expound on that and expand on that, if you could.
So I just thought it needed to be said. I have the highest respect for scientists and physicians and for people who have developed so many things that are saving lives and curing disease. But scientists are like everybody else. They're people. They have conflicts of interest, and we should be very open about that. That we sort of have a little quote that we can't hide behind our white coats of self-righteousness, that we have hundreds of thousands of dollars in salaries and millions of dollars at stake. And this needs to be, in reputations, I think, is very, very important among an generally anti-Republican scientific community. So these need to be explicitly talked about.
If I could just do one follow-up to that. Does it concern you that conference call I referenced in my opening statement, that conference call there was only one person from our government on there and all these others were scientists who were getting our American taxpayers' money? Does that concern you, that call, the way that took place?
It's not sort of a smoking gun concern to me, but what would be a concern to me is that wasn't specifically related to Dr. Cadillac or the Secretary of HHS or anybody on the task force immediately, or to me. That really should have been done. This was very important. And we say that it doesn't matter whether it was in the lab or not, but that's not necessarily true. If we would have known it were a lab-derived bug, for which they probably had years of work, it might have appreciably helped our countermeasures, how we go about understanding whether it could be asymptomatic or not. So this was critical. And I think that email, all that blacked out spots needs to be, maybe we don't need to know it, but Congress needs to know it and understand.
Sure do. Okay, finally, if I could, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence. Dr. Mueller, in the close of your opening statement, you said that people were afraid. You talked to people in the research community, in your community, who were afraid to be doing any research that might expose the truth that this came from a lab because they were concerned about getting blackballed from China. Is that right? You said something to that effect?
That's pretty close. I'm not sure that they were convinced. They didn't want to be involved in that kind of investigation. How that investigation would turn out, they weren't sure. But yes, there were other reasons too. When people learned I was going to come here, I live in Berkeley. I get lots of advice. I get advice not only from my friends and colleagues in Berkeley, but I get advice from all around the country.
Yeah.
Not one person of all my friends and advisors thought I should come to this committee.
So
The reason was because it was Republicans. My response to every one of them is I am not going to go and, scientists, yes, they are often biased. You need to distinguish between scientists' opinions and science. And science is nonpartisan. Science is unbiased. I came here and I told all of them I was going to come here and I will talk to anybody.
Yeah.
And I want to present science because I think in this case, the science by itself carries the argument. I don't want you to ask me for my opinions on things. If I stick to the science, then I can defend myself against my friends.
The chairman just refreshed my memory. He said the words you used were enemies of China, I think you used, when anyone who would be doing research that would go against the evolutionary theory of this was going to be somehow attacked. But it wasn't just China. This is my point. It was everyone. Dr. Fauci was against doing that. The media was against. If you did that, big tech went against. Everyone went against the people who were actually, as it turns out, focusing on the truth. That is a scary thing for our country. And it goes right to your point. That's about opinions and politics, not about science. And that is what has happened, what did happen for the last year and a half. And my point that I made in my opening statement was, and Dr. Fauci, I believe, based on what I showed you all, I believe knew that from the get-go and was misleading the American people. And again, maybe I'm wrong, but he could have came here and answered my questions.
Another quick anecdote. In September, when I called a virologist at a national laboratory and said, I was soliciting some help. This was before I met Dr. Quay. I was soliciting some help on this issue. He said, no, I'm not going to touch that. I'm not going to recommend anybody touch that because it would help the reelection of Donald Trump.
Yep.
So it was a political issue for some of them.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mueller. Again, thank you for an all.
To the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, Democrats started last week with one of their members saying we should get rid of the police altogether. They ended last week with another one of their members being admonished by the trial judge in Minneapolis for saying ridiculous things. And what they do in between? They pass this bill out of committee, which gives 2 new Democrat senators to the District of Columbia. And less than 24 hours after that bill passed in committee, they introduced legislation to pack the Supreme Court. In 3 months of Democrats being in control of the federal government, they have increased the debt by $2 trillion. They created a crisis on the southern border, and they continue their push to defund the police. And now, so they can continue their radical policies, think about what else they've passed out of this body. A bill to federalize our voting laws, federalize our election laws, a bill to pack the court, as I said. They introduced that. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee, of all people, introduced that bill. And here we are today, pure power grab to give 2 Democrat senators to District of Columbia. There is a crisis on our southern border. The American people want us to focus on the crisis. Even the president called it a crisis. Let's stop the power grab. Let's deal with the issues the American people want us to deal with. That's what we should be focused on. I hope we vote this bill down. I urge a no vote and yield back to the gentleman from Kentucky.
Gentleman from Ohio yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. Gentleman